The desperate scream of a young woman pierced through the dusty main street of Fargo, North Dakota, in the spring of 1876. But the townsfolk merely lowered their heads and quickened their pace, pretending not to hear the commotion coming from outside Yates' General Store. Rebecca Turner struggled against the iron grip of her stepfather, Ezekiel Waite, as he roughly shoved her toward a hulking man with a gray-streaked beard and yellowed teeth. "A deal's a deal, Thornton," Ezekiel declared, his voice slurring from whiskey consumed since dawn. "One bag of grain for the girl. She's strong enough to work and quiet when she needs to be." He pushed Rebecca forward, causing her to stumble into the dirt. Rebecca's honey-brown hair fell across her face as she looked up, eyes burning with hatred and terror. At 19, she had endured 3 years of Ezekiel's cruelty since her mother's death, but never imagined he would sink this low. The drought had destroyed their small farm outside town, and with nothing left to sell, he had turned to the final asset under his control, her. "Please," she whispered, her throat raw from screaming. "Someone help me." But the few witnesses hurried past, averting their eyes from the shameful transaction. This was the harsh reality of frontier life when times got desperate, terrible choices were made. Thornton, a notorious ranch hand with a reputation for brutality, grabbed Rebecca's wrist and examined her like livestock. "Bit scrawny," he complained, "but I reckon she'll do." Just as Thornton was reaching for the reins of his horse, a shadow fell across the scene. A tall figure dismounted from a chestnut stallion, spurs jingling softly against the boardwalk. James Yancy stood with the easy confidence of a man comfortable with the weight of the Colt revolver at his hip. At 26, his face was already weathered from years under the harsh Dakota sun, but his eyes remained clear and sharp as they took in the situation. "What's happening here, Ezekiel?" James asked, his voice deceptively calm. He had known the Turners for years, had watched Rebecca grow from a shy child into a young woman of quiet dignity. "None of your business, Yancy," Ezekiel spat. "Private transaction." James turned his attention to Rebecca, noting the bruise forming on her cheek and the terror in her eyes. "Miss Turner, is this arrangement to your liking?" Rebecca's lips trembled as she shook her head, unable to form words through her fear. "She ain't got no say," Thornton growled. "Her pa and I shook on it, 1 bag of grain for her services." James's hand casually moved to rest on his holster as he stepped closer, his shadow stretching between Rebecca and her would-be buyer. "You're wrong on 2 counts, Thornton. First, this man isn't her father. Second," his voice hardened, "she's worth 1,000 harvests, not your miserable sack of grain." The street grew quiet as townspeople stopped to watch the confrontation. Thornton's hand twitched near his own weapon. "I paid fair," Thornton said, his face reddening with anger. "You got no right to interfere." "I'm making it my right," James replied. He reached into his pocket and tossed a leather pouch that landed with a heavy clink at Ezekiel's feet. "There's enough gold there to buy 20 bags of grain. Consider your debt to this man paid, Ezekiel." Ezekiel's eyes widened at the sight of the gold, greed quickly overpowering any loyalty to his arrangement. He snatched up the pouch, weighing it appreciatively. "Now," James continued, "I suggest you both be on your way." Thornton's face twisted with rage. "You think you can just—" "I do," James cut him off. "Unless you'd prefer to discuss this further." His hand remained steady on his holster, his meaning clear. A tense moment passed before Thornton spat into the dirt. "Ain't worth the trouble," he muttered, shooting a venomous look at Rebecca before mounting his horse and riding away. Ezekiel clutched his newfound wealth, already eyeing the saloon. "She's your problem now, Yancy," he said with a dismissive wave, staggering away without a backward glance at his stepdaughter. Only when both men had disappeared did James finally approach Rebecca, who stood trembling in the street. "Miss Turner," he said gently, removing his hat. "Are you hurt?" Rebecca stared at him, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Why would you do that for me?" James offered a small, sad smile. Because no person should be sold like cattle, especially not someone like you. He glanced around at the curious onlookers. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe. Rebecca hesitated, suddenly aware of her precarious situation. Without Ezekiel's home, deplorable as it was, she had nowhere to go. I have nothing to repay you with, she said softly. I'm not asking for payment, James replied firmly. My sister Sarah runs a boarding house on the edge of town. She can offer you a room and honest work if you want it. Hope flickered in Rebecca's eyes for the first time in years. Thank you, Mr. Yancy. James, he corrected with a gentle smile. My name is James. As they walked toward his horse, Rebecca cast one final look at the general store where her life had nearly been traded away for a sack of grain. Whatever happened next, she swore to herself she would never again be at the mercy of men like Ezekiel or Thornton. James helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. Hold tight, he instructed, keeping a respectful distance despite their proximity. As they rode through town, Rebecca felt the curious stares of townspeople who had witnessed her humiliation but done nothing to stop it. She held her head high, determined not to show them her shame. Why did you say that? She asked suddenly. About me being worth 1,000 harvests, James was quiet for a moment before answering. Because it's true, a person's worth can't be measured in bags of grain or gold coins. Your life is your own, Rebecca. It always has been. The boarding house was a modest 2-story building painted white with blue trim. As they approached, a woman with the same striking blue eyes as James emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. James. I wasn't expecting you until Sarah Yancy stopped, noticing Rebecca. Her expression shifted from surprise to understanding as she took in the young woman's disheveled appearance and tear-stained face. Sarah, James said, dismounting and helping Rebecca down. This is Miss Rebecca Turner. She needs a place to stay. Sarah's warm smile put Rebecca at ease immediately. Any friend of my brother's is welcome here. Come inside, dear. You look like you could use some hot food and a quiet place to rest. Rebecca hesitated, looking back at James. How can I ever thank you? Live your life, he said simply. That's thanks enough. As Sarah led her inside, Rebecca glanced over her shoulder to see James watching her go, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. The boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, with polished wooden floors and simple curtains. A far cry from the squalor Rebecca had endured with Ezekiel. Sarah showed her to a small but tidy room on the second floor. It's not much, Sarah apologized, but it's private. Rebecca touched the quilt on the bed with reverence. It's perfect, she whispered. Sarah's kind eyes studied her. James didn't tell me what happened, but I can guess. This town can be cruel, especially to women alone. You're safe here. Rebecca's composure finally cracked. He bought me, she said, her voice breaking. My stepfather sold me for a bag of grain and your brother. She couldn't continue. Sarah embraced her gently. James has always been that way. Even as a boy, he couldn't abide injustice. She pulled back, meeting Rebecca's gaze. Rest now. Tomorrow, if you're willing, we can discuss work. I can always use help around here. After Sarah left, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. In a single day, she had been reduced to property, rescued by a stranger, and offered a chance at a new life. As she watched the sunset through her window, she made a silent promise to herself. She would repay James Yancy's kindness, no matter how long it took. The following morning, Rebecca woke to the unfamiliar comfort of a clean bed. For a moment, she feared it had all been a dream, that she would open her eyes to find herself back in Ezekiel's dilapidated farmhouse. But the sunlight streaming through lace curtains confirmed her new reality. Downstairs, she found Sarah preparing breakfast for the boarders, a traveling salesman, an elderly schoolteacher, and a young couple passing through on their way to Oregon. They greeted her politely, asking no questions about her sudden appearance, for which Rebecca was grateful. I'd like to help, Rebecca told Sarah after breakfast as the other boarders departed for their day. I can cook, clean, mend, whatever you need. Sarah beamed. I could certainly use the help. The last girl I hired married a cattle rancher and left me short-handed. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca settled into a routine. She rose early to help prepare breakfast, cleaned rooms, did laundry, and assisted with dinner. The work was hard but honest, and Sarah paid her a fair wage. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt something like peace. James visited the boarding house regularly, though he never stayed long. Each time, his eyes would find Rebecca's across the room, and a silent acknowledgement would pass between them. He never mentioned the incident that had brought her there, for which she was grateful. One evening in late May, Rebecca was hanging laundry in the yard when James appeared at the gate. He had shaved, and his usually dusty clothes were clean. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "Miss Turner," he greeted her, "you're looking well." It was true. Regular meals and freedom from Ezekiel's tyranny had brought color back to her cheeks and a sparkle to her eyes. "Mr. Yancy," she replied with a small smile, "what brings you by this evening?" "I was wondering if you might like to accompany me to the social at the church this Sunday," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "If you're not otherwise engaged, that is." Rebecca stared at him in surprise. Since her rescue, she had kept largely to the boarding house, afraid of facing the townspeople who had witnessed her humiliation. "I don't know if that's wise," she said softly. "People talk." James stepped closer. "Let them talk. You've done nothing wrong, Rebecca." The use of her first name sent a strange flutter through her chest. "Why are you being so kind to me?" His blue eyes held hers. "Because I admire your strength. Most people would have broken under what you've endured, but not you." Rebecca looked down at her calloused hands, remembering the day her life had changed. "You called me worth 1,000 harvests," she recalled. "No one's ever spoken about me that way before." "I meant it," James said simply. A warm breeze stirred the drying sheets around them, creating a momentary private world. Rebecca found herself nodding. "Yes," she said. "I'd like to attend the social with you." James's smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual seriousness. "I'll call for you at 4 then." He seemed about to say more, but instead donned his hat and departed with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before. From the kitchen window, Sarah watched the exchange with a knowing smile. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild weather. Rebecca wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Sarah had helped her alter, and arranged her hair with care. When James arrived, his appreciative gaze made her blush. The church social was held on the lawn beside the white clapboard building that served as Fargo's house of worship. Tables laden with food, children running and laughing, and a small group of musicians playing fiddle and banjo created a festive atmosphere. As they approached, Rebecca felt the weight of stares and whispers. News of her near sale had spread throughout the small community, as such gossip inevitably did. She faltered, but James placed her hand firmly in the crook of his arm. "Hold your head high," he murmured. "You're worth more than all of them combined." His confidence bolstered her, and Rebecca straightened her shoulders as they joined the gathering. To her surprise, many greeted her warmly, especially the women. Sarah had evidently spread word of Rebecca's industriousness and good character, helping to overcome the scandal of her arrival. As the evening progressed, Rebecca found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of community fellowship. James stayed attentively by her side, fetching her lemonade and introducing her to those she hadn't met. When the musicians struck up a lively reel, he turned to her with a question in his eyes. "I don't know how to dance," she admitted. "Neither do I," he confessed with a laugh. "But I reckon we could figure it out together." Their attempts were clumsy but joyful, and Rebecca found herself laughing freely for what felt like the first time in years. As the music slowed, James's hand rested lightly on her waist, maintaining a respectful distance even as the other couples drew closer. The moment was shattered by a familiar, slurred voice. "Well, ain't this touching?" Ezekiel Waite stood at the edge of the gathering, unsteady on his feet, his clothes filthy and his eyes bloodshot. The gold James had given him had evidently gone to whiskey rather than grain. What's she doing here, playing the respectable lady? Ezekiel demanded loudly. Everyone knows she's damaged goods, sold and paid for. A hush fell over the social as all eyes turned to Rebecca and her stepfather. James stepped forward, placing himself between them, but Rebecca gently moved him aside. "I was never yours to sell, Ezekiel," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent lawn. "My mother may have married you, but I never belonged to you." Ungrateful little, Ezekiel lunged forward, but two men from the congregation intercepted him. The minister, Reverend Caldwell, stepped forward. "Mr. Waite, you're not welcome here in this condition. I suggest you leave. You're all fools," Ezekiel spat as he was escorted away. "She ain't worth the dirt under your boots." In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Rebecca felt the weight of every stare. Humiliation burned through her and she turned to flee, but James caught her hand. "Don't let him win," he whispered. Then, raising his voice, he addressed the gathering. "I believe Miss Turner and I were in the middle of a dance." He nodded to the musicians, who hesitantly resumed playing. James led Rebecca back to the center of the improvised dance floor, placing one hand respectfully on her waist and holding her hand with the other. After a moment's hesitation, other couples joined them. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered, blinking back tears. "You don't need to thank me," James replied. "You stood up to him yourself. I just wanted everyone to see what I already know, that you're the strongest person in this town." As they swayed to the music, Rebecca realized something had shifted between them. The gratitude she felt toward James had grown into something deeper, something that made her heart race when his eyes met hers. When he escorted her back to the boarding house that evening, they lingered on the porch, reluctant to end the night despite the unpleasant interruption. "I'm sorry about Ezekiel," Rebecca said. "He ruined what was a lovely evening." James shook his head. "He didn't ruin anything. In fact, he gave you a chance to show everyone exactly who you are." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "Rebecca, I'd like to call on you properly if you'll allow it." Her heart skipped. "You would, even after everything, especially after everything," James said firmly. "I've never met anyone like you, Rebecca Turner." Before she could respond, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then departed with a tip of his hat, leaving her breathless on the porch. Sarah found her there minutes later, still staring after James's retreating figure. "I take it my brother finally found his courage," she said with a knowing smile. Rebecca turned to her, cheeks flushed. "Is it improper? After how we met, I mean." Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "Love finds us in the strangest of circumstances, dear. There's nothing improper about two good-hearted people finding each other." Over the following months, James courted Rebecca with old-fashioned propriety. He called on her every Sunday after church, sometimes taking her for drives in his wagon, other times simply sitting with her on the boarding house porch. They talked of everything: his work at the ranch he partially owned with two partners, her dreams of someday having a home of her own, the books they both enjoyed. Rebecca continued working at the boarding house, saving her wages and slowly building a small hope chest. The incident with Ezekiel gradually faded from town gossip as newer scandals took its place, though Rebecca never forgot the lesson it had taught her about her own resilience. One crisp October evening, James invited her to ride out to his ranch. "There's something I want to show you," he explained, offering no further details. The ranch was modest but thriving, with a small herd of cattle and several acres of good grazing land. James led her past the main house to a rise overlooking a creek, where a stand of cottonwood trees provided shade. There, to Rebecca's surprise, stood the frame of a small cabin under construction. "What is this?" she asked, taking in the half-built walls and stacked lumber. James removed his hat, suddenly nervous. It could be a home for a family." He cleared his throat. "For us, if you'd want that." Rebecca stared at him, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know it hasn't been that long," James continued hurriedly, "and you deserve a proper courtship, but I've known since the day I first saw you that you were special, Rebecca. Not because you needed rescuing, but because of the strength I saw in your eyes even then." He took her hands in his. You don't need me, you've proven you can make your own way, but I'm hoping you might want me anyway. Tears filled Rebecca's eyes as she looked at the half-built cabin, then back to the man before her. You truly see me, don't you? She whispered. Not as something to be bought or sold, but as a person. I see you, James confirmed softly. I see your courage, your kindness, your determination. And I love everything I see. It was the first time either had spoken of love, and the word hung between them, precious and new. Rebecca squeezed his hands. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I want that future with you. James's face broke into a radiant smile, and he pulled her gently into his arms. Their first kiss was tender and promising, a seal on the future they would build together. They married on a bright day in November 1876, just 6 months after their unusual first meeting. The ceremony was held in the very church where they had danced, with Sarah serving as Rebecca's matron of honor. The entire town turned out, many of the same people who had once whispered about Rebecca, now celebrating her happiness. Ezekiel was not among them. He had left Fargo months earlier, after gambling away the last of James's gold. Rebecca found she could think of him now with pity rather than fear, a broken man who had tried to break her but failed. After the wedding, James brought Rebecca to their finished cabin. It was simple but sturdy, with windows that caught the morning light and a stone fireplace he had built himself. On the mantel sat a small bag of grain. What's this? Rebecca asked, touching the rough burlap. James wrapped his arms around her from behind. A reminder, he said softly, of how we met and of what I knew then, that you're worth 1,000 harvests and more. Rebecca turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. I never thought I could be this happy, she confessed. That day in town I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. Our life, James corrected gently, kissing her forehead. And this is just the start. The winter of 1876-1877 was harsh, with blizzards that isolated their small cabin for days at a time. But inside was warmth and love. Rebecca proved to be not only a dedicated wife but a true partner, helping with the ranch accounts, which James admitted he had never been good at keeping. Together, they weathered the hardships of frontier life with resilience and unity. By spring, their small herd had grown, and with it, their hopes for the future. The cabin expanded with a new room added to the back. When Rebecca discovered she was with child that May, exactly 1 year after James had rescued her, they celebrated by planting a garden that would nourish their growing family. Their son, Daniel, was born in the depths of winter, with Sarah acting as midwife. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. As Rebecca held him in her arms, with James looking on in wonder, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From one bag of grain to a family, she murmured, smiling up at her husband. James kissed her tenderly. Worth every harvest that will ever come, he whispered against her lips. The years that followed brought both joys and hardships. Their ranch prospered, allowing them to build a larger home as their family grew to include a daughter, Elizabeth, born 2 years after Daniel. The drought of 1881 nearly destroyed everything they had built, but together they persevered, just as they had overcome every obstacle life placed in their path. By 1886, 10 years after their fateful meeting, the Yancy Ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. James had been elected to the town council, where he advocated for the rights of women and the less fortunate. Rebecca had started a small school on their property for the children of neighboring ranchers, fulfilling a dream she had once thought impossible. On the anniversary of the day they met, James always presented Rebecca with a single grain of wheat, a tradition that made her smile even as it reminded her of how far they had come. Do you ever regret it? She asked him one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Spending your gold to buy my freedom all those years ago, James took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he had placed there. That was the best investment I ever made, he said with a smile. Though I didn't buy your freedom, Rebecca, you were always free in here. He touched her heart gently. I just helped clear the path. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, watching as Daniel taught Elizabeth how to twirl a lasso. 1,000 harvests, she mused. We're well on our way. James pressed a kiss to her temple, and each one more precious than the last. As the sun set over their land, painting the prairie in gold and crimson, Rebecca reflected on the strange twist of fate that had transformed her darkest day into the beginning of a beautiful journey. From a young woman sold for a bag of grain, she had become a wife, mother, teacher, and respected member of the community, not through James's rescue alone, but through her own strength and determination. The prairie winds carried the scent of ripening wheat as night fell, wrapping the Yancy homestead in peaceful darkness. Inside their home, the light of their love continued to burn, illuminating a future built on respect, partnership, and the unshakable belief in each other's worth far greater than all the harvests that would ever grace the Dakota plains.